Good morning. Today I thought I'd give you a quick lesson on how to make an herbal syrup. And in this case, we're going to make an herbal syrup out of rabbit tobacco, Pseudonephalium obtusifolium. In some of the old books, you'll see it listed as Nephalium obtusifolium. Regardless, this is a common wildflower in the deep south. It's a little hard to find for most people in the spring and summer because the leaves are green on top, white on the bottom. But as it dries, and the terpenes build up in it in the fall, from the base up, you'll start to see the leaves turn brown and silvery. Makes it much easier to find, and then you'll realize it's in abundance. But this is a traditional old southern folk medicine that has a multitude of uses. Now, most people are familiar with rabbit tobacco, as in go out behind the barn, roll some up in an old paper sack and smoke it when you couldn't get tobacco. But it has more uses than that. As a smoke, if you were to inhale it, it will cause spasmodic reflexive action of the lungs. You'll get phlegm up out of the lungs. You'll get bronchitis eased up greatly because of pulling all that mucus out. Plus it helps, as they say, dry the lungs up. If you have wet, runny sinuses, it'll dry them up as well. But on the flip side, it also seems to help with dry sinuses. It shrinks the mucus tissue down. And a lot of people don't realize just how good this plant is as a respiratory antiviral, especially if you harvest the leaves from the base up as they turn brown, and that terpene content, which is antiviral, anti-cancer, a host of medicinal uses, is at its peak. But for today, what we're going to do is make a syrup. Now, I don't mean pancake syrup. If you put this on your pancakes, you won't like it because it's drying, it's very astringent, and a lot of people will perceive astringent drying herbs as bitter. I do particularly. To me, it tastes on the not pleasant side. But it is wonderful for that. What it does is it helps to pull moisture into that dry tissue. So if you've got dry coughs at the upper part of the lungs, or even in the rest of it, or your sinuses are dry, this will help you to moisten it. And part of that are the chemicals in it, and part of it is the sugar that's in it that causes what is called a hypertonic relationship for the body to pull moisture to dilute things down. So for this batch, what we're going to do is not worry about the high terpene leaves or the low terpene leaves. The whole purpose of this will work. It'll work just fine. So for this recipe, we're going to do about 3 cups of leaves, including the flowers and even the stems. And as the old traditional herbalist would say, for which I'm one, 3 handfuls. And after doing this for so many years, you can visualize that handful, that handful, that handful. You've got 3 cups. So what we want to do is just break this up a little bit, wad it up, fold it up, it really doesn't matter. Add it to a pot of sufficient size and pour 4 cups of water. Bring it to a boil. And once it comes to a boil, you can take the lid off because you want that water to start evaporating off. And we want to reduce this 4 cups of liquid down to 2 cups. So I'm going to do several pots, and you can do this in 2 pots. But just to show you the stages, is once that has boiled for 20-30 minutes, and no, you won't boil off all of the good chemicals in it. It works, trust me. You will end up with approximately 2 cups of a dark decoction. For those of you who don't understand some of these terms like infusion, tisane, decoction, a decoction is where you take a plant that is either green or woody and you boil it. And that gets the water down to where all those chemicals are and extracts them out. It makes an aqueous extract. So after about 20-30 minutes, and it has reduced down to about approximately 2 cups, somewhere in that neighborhood. It really doesn't matter because you're going to reduce it further in the last step, is you want to add 1 cup of white sugar. Now this really is to taste. Some people don't like white sugar. They have health reasons, whatever, for not using it. So you could use honey, agave, any sweetener, but it is important in this recipe to use a sugar source, because that is what helps cause that hypertonic relationship in the cells to draw fluid and pull fluid to that dry area. So what we want to do now is simply stir the sugar well into the 2 cups of liquid. And then we'll start to reduce it. You can initially do this on high, get it a good rolling boil, but as time goes by, and this will take a little while, and it gets thicker and thicker, you need to keep an eye on it or you'll scorch your syrup before it can become syrup. And by saying syrup, I'm not saying this has to be as thick as pancake thick molasses type syrup, but it will definitely be thick. So after 30-40 minutes of this, you'll end up with liquid like this, which is thick. When it's hot, it won't be as thick as when it cools off later. And on an aside, if you're wondering what is the syrup stage, how do you tell when it's going to be at that syrup stage? Approximately 219 to 224 degrees with a candy thermometer, you know you're at the syrup stage. Cold spoon, drop a little bit on a cold plate, put it in the fridge, see how fast it gels up. All of those are different techniques. What I typically do is I've done this so much that I just watch it. And you can see it get thick, get a sheen to it, and it looks like syrup. So when it reaches that stage, we'll then just take it, put it in a jar, and now you can see how thick it is. Your 4 cups of liquid reduced to 2 cups of liquid has now reduced to approximately half a pint. So you can take that, seal it, water bath it for 15 minutes if you want to save it for a long period of time, or simply put it in the refrigerator. And the higher the sugar content in the syrup, the longer it will actually last since it acts as a preservative. But this is a great, great cough medicine for wet coughs. I wouldn't do it for dry lung, but for wet issues. And even though it's not got all the lower leaves in it, it's still a good respiratory antiviral as a syrup. And you can get this down kids and finicky people a little bit easier. It's okay. I mean, it's not my favorite, but it's okay. And if you use it, try to heat it up and use it warm at least. That's also something that will bring blood to the surface of the vessels, transport those chemicals more effectively, and give you faster relief than if it was simply just a cold syrup. So that's your tip for the day. Very simple. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me.